Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here this year with you here at the mextesol 2020 convention. My name is Mary Meineke, and I will be sharing with you today my talk on multicultural education. First, the talk we will discuss ideas about what is culture and multicultural education. And in the second part of the talk, I will go through ideas, tips, and activities that I myself have used in the classroom. First of all, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background on me. I grew up in Houston, Texas, in a comfortable middle-class neighborhood. I learned English and a little bit of Spanish, and I really thought I was open to different cultures and ways of thinking and interacting with people. However, much later in life, I discovered how little I really knew about multiculturalism. I'd taken a few multicultural classes in high school and college. I had friends from different countries, races, religions, etc., but I was really not in touch with all of the dimensions of multiculturalism. I moved to Mexico over 20 years ago, and now I really experience living, thinking, and working in another culture. The first step, as I have found, and supported by Banks and Allport, is that you must be in touch with who you are as yourself. What is your own identity and how you see others and how they see you? Luckily for all of you listening today, there is an increased consciousness and awareness of this topic. Given the current events happening in the US and around the world today, teachers have been sharing all of their ideas, activities, and many more things they can use in the classroom. So, welcome to this conference on multiculturalism from theory to practice. Let's get started to this work in progress. Here we go. The topic of today's talk today is multiculturalism from theory to practice. My name is Mary Ann Meineke, and I currently work at the Universidad de Monterrey. Here is my email. I would love to hear from you at any time. Any of your thoughts, feedback, comments, ideas, please feel free to share them with me. First of all, how many languages can you say hello in? How many languages? Next, let's look at statistics on globalization. Since the year 1990s, 2000, we have become more and more connected around the world in terms of capital, people, trade, and information. The flow of information has been flowing across borders around the world, as we can see from YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, just to name a few, on how the increase in information has been increased. Well, the goal for our students as English teachers and as regular classroom teachers is to give our students an appreciation of cultural differences. We want our students to be able to effectively work with individuals. We want our students to have the skills and knowledge of a culture so that they can effectively work with members of other cultures, whether it be in English, Spanish, French, German, no matter what language it is. Let's back up a little bit and discuss stereotypes. Linked hand in hand directly related to multiculturalism is the idea of stereotypes and biases we have. So I'd like to take just a moment to discuss at what ages do stereotypes start to form. Here's what some researchers and neuroscientists said. If you notice here on the bottom, it is normal for preschool children from 3 to 5 years old. They are starting to learn to categorize and classify things based on their shapes, if it's round or square, the color, red, blue. That is a normal part of their process. Now, here in the middle, as we can see, it says over here on point number 4, the welcoming schools study, it says children start to apply stereotypes as early as the ages of 3 to 5 years old. Just to be aware of that for those of you who are preschool and elementary school teachers, this is the point when students will start to apply these stereotypes. And by the ages of 8 and 9, children can help their classmates and their peers to reduce their stereotypes, ideas, and biases. Now, what is culture? What is culture? What are all the aspects and components of culture? Now that you've had a moment to think about that, let's take a look at some definitions. Georgetown University says that culture can be thoughts, communications, languages, practices, beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, roles, interaction. What else is culture? There are still some components of culture that are missing here. What else are components of culture? Here's another picture up on the screen. Here we have included language. Obviously, we are all language teachers here today, so language is a very important part of culture. Religion, child rearing methods, food, delicious food, art, celebrations, jokes, manners, clothes, dressing, working schedules. What else is culture? I think we're still missing a few components here. What else could we add to this definition of culture? Now that you've had a moment to think, we could also add in the role of the woman in the society. Also, the sense of time, whether you arrive at 5 o'clock or 5:10 or 4:50. And I'm sure there are many more components that we have not listed here. Now, let's go into the second part of this presentation and look at four different activities, there we go, that you can use in your classroom. I'm going to show you the activities and show you some of the examples I have used with my own students. As I mentioned at the beginning, the first thing on the road to multiculturalism is understanding your own culture, understanding your own self. One activity I ask my students to do is to say, well, what do you think or feel about Mexican culture? If my students are from Japan, I say, okay, what do you feel about Japanese culture? What do you feel about the culture of your country? How can you define it? If a person from another country asks you to describe your home country, what would you say about it? This is an activity I have them do individually. And sometimes I say, hey guys, can you add on your image? Can you add on an image to your definition? And this is the first step in this discussion on their self-reflection. Here is what some of my students say. Here's what another student says. And here's what another student says. Now, that is the first step. Each student prepares their individual reflection of what it's like to be a Mexican. The second step is I combine them in groups and I have them discuss what are their similarities and differences so they can start to see each person's different point of view. First step is individual, second step is in groups so they can see each person's individual point of view. So they can see how diverse or how similar Mexicans in this case are. Activity number 2. It's an identity diagram. We can also call it a who am I? Who am I? I would like to show you a very short video, one of my favorite movies from Shrek. I'm sure we are all aware who Shrek is. Give me one moment to put this up on the screen. Here we go. Okay. Let's listen to what Shrek has to say about himself. Beautiful clip there with Shrek stating that ogres have layers, just like onions. They both have layers. They both have multiple parts of their personality. Here is the video link up on the screen. And here is what Shrek said. There is a lot more to ogres than people think. Ogres are like onions and they have layers, which brings us to this, who am I? Who am I? We could do this who am I as a conceptual map where students can put in the parts they think that are most important or significant of them, of their identity. Or an even better way, an option 2, is I put the onion up here representing Shrek and the fact that ogres have layers and ogres are like onions, and that we can be like onions. We have many different identities. Here are some of my students' identities that they placed on their onion. If we notice at the top onion, I love that one of my students put in the very middle, this student wrote, my biggest dream and my fears. She put that in the very, very, very middle of her onion, representing her most deepest, darkest part of her. She also wrote that she's a woman, she's thin, she's a student, leader, creative, etc. And it really had her reflect on who she was. Over on the bottom, we have another student who wrote physical characteristics such as girl, dark brown hair, friendly, kind, smiling, music lover. Here we have Rayada. We're here in Monterrey, home of the Rayados or Monterrey Stripes. And the first step is for the students to identify who are they, what are the important parts of their identity, whether it's on a conceptual map or on this picture of an onion. Here's another example of a way you could have students do this. You can do this from young students to older students. This was done with university students, but you can easily adapt it for elementary students. This one is divided in social identities on one side and personal identities on the other side. And the first step of this is for the students to express and write down all of their identities. Step number 2 is a reflection again. Step number 2 is the reflection. And I ask them to reflect on, well, what's important to you? What's not important or meaningful to you? Which parts of your identity do you choose? Which parts of your identity does society choose? And it leads us to a beautiful discussion of who are they? Who are they and what is important to them? As I said before, you can adapt it to university students all the way down to elementary school students. Activity number 3. Culture-specific and cultural general learning. What does this mean? Let's take a look. Basically, there are different knowledge, skills, and attitudes we need for acquiring or being able to live and work in a different culture. Let's see an example of what that means. Basically, we have cultural things, personal things, and universal things. Culture is what a group of people have in common. For example, if we go to Japan, we would probably eat our food with chopsticks. That would be cultural. That's what makes them unique. Personal could be that, well, I prefer to sleep with a light on in my bathroom. That's my personal choice. Or I prefer to walk or ride a bike in place of using my car. And the last one, universal. Universal. An example of this could be, well, if I'm cold, Most people will put on a jacket. Let's see if you understood this. Let's try a mini quiz. And this information is taken from this site, this source listed on the bottom of the slide. I'll give you a moment to read through these and decide if they are universal, cultural, or personal. Because we're pressed for time, I'll go ahead and show the answers. Please feel free to take a screenshot. For example, number 1, eating with chopsticks, we wrote that as culture. Number 2, women walking 5 steps behind men, we also wrote that as culture. Number 8, we had a discussion, my students and I, we said, well, being depressed after the death of a loved one, we said, okay, that can be personal. And then some students said universal. So this leads us to a nice discussion of, how would you categorize different aspects, universal, cultural, or personal? And this is activity number 3. Activity number 3. It's a way to get students to start to think, well, what things do I do that are personal, cultural, or universal? Us as foreign and second language teachers, well, what is culture for us? What is culture for us? The goal of culture in the classroom is to make our students more aware, increase their understanding and knowledge of the other culture, and most importantly for us as English teachers or French teachers or German teachers, is to develop those skills to apply that new language to different and diverse situations. My students and I put this acronym or created this acronym of RAV, an easy way to remember. R is recognize cultural differences. A is accept cultural differences, and V is value. The first step is to recognize we are all different. The second step is accept, and the third is value. Some of us will stay in the step 1 of recognize. Others of us will be able to move to step 2 or step 3. But the important thing is to start the process and to get with step 1 to recognize there are cultural differences. Now, there is Dr. Thomas Garza from the University of Texas, and he mentioned that culture is the 5th skill. As English teachers or foreign language or second language teachers, we teach reading, we teach writing, we teach speaking, we teach listening. But what about culture? Dr. Garza mentions the importance of culture as a 5th skill. He states that language without cultural relevance is nearly useless. I mean, if we're going to teach the language, students also have to know how to use that language and which language is appropriate in different circumstances. And he also states that yet successfully teaching the cultural element in our foreign language classes remains a challenge. A great site for some resources and activities is this Center for Open Educational Resources and Language Learning at the University of Texas. And I'm going to go ahead and move on since I see time is clicking down here. Next one, cultural relativity. Cultural relativity. Think about this. Breakfast around the world. I would like to share with you a very short video of different breakfasts around the world. Hopefully this will get you hungry and thinking about your breakfast for tomorrow. Give me one moment to share my screen.
Oh, you both have layers. Oh.
Okay, here is the video. Take a look, see which breakfast is your favorite. Okay, which was your favorite breakfast? They all look delicious, absolutely delicious. Notice the word breakfast, the word breakfast. I think of breakfast, and maybe my idea of breakfast is toast and scrambled eggs and ham and orange juice. Maybe your idea of breakfast is something different. Maybe it's a Nutella sandwich, or maybe it's crepes or tacos de barbacoa. Delicious. We're all hungry right now. I'm going to share my presentation again. Give me one moment to get it up here. So the point of this cultural relativity is that my idea of breakfast and your idea of breakfast are completely different, yet we use the same word of breakfast. So just to be aware of that even though the word's the same, our concepts and ideas related and connected to that word can be different. Another thing to look at is, well, how can we understand cultural practices? The idea is to be able to have another viewpoint, to see it through their eyes. If you notice on the PowerPoint screen up here, there is a picture of an eye as though we're looking at the word breakfast or seeing breakfast through someone else's eyes. When we think about cultural relativism, we think, food. Food is an excellent example. Maybe instead of thinking, eating liquid squid or octopus is not pretty and I don't like it, maybe I think it's gross or disgusting, I should be asking myself instead, well, why do some cultures eat live or different food? Maybe we'll learn that eating live octopus has many health benefits. Activity, next activity. Here it says activity 3, but I think it's really activity 4. Beauty. Beauty. I've had my students, I give them 10 minutes and I say, hey, you have 10 minutes to find 5 pictures of what beauty means to you. Because ideas of beauty can be very, very different. I would like to share with you what my students have said. Here is group 1. Group 2. Group 3. Group 4. And group 5. So the first thing is my students, they do these in groups, they look for their pictures, and then we come together as a class and we share these pictures to discuss similarities and differences. One thing that was similar here was many of the students picked flowers as beauty, different sorts of flowers. Many of them picked beaches. This was a class of all female students, so maybe that's why you see flowers and the color pink. And many of them also chose this same dog, this Labrador dog. This activity serves two purposes. First, we can discuss the idea of beauty, and second, it leads us into how our internet searches can be guided and we get some of the same results. So this activity also has two purposes. Let's go ahead and move to the next activity that I would like to share with you. The last activity that I have here, we call it Big C versus Little C. Big culture versus little culture. What is that? Well, it was developed, or the idea was coined back in the 1970s by Edward T. Hall. And he compared culture of a society with an iceberg. Parts of the iceberg are on top, you can clearly see them. And the other part of the iceberg is under the water and it's more invisible. And he compared that with parts of a society are more visible, such as behaviors and practices, which are more observable and visible, and we could coin those or call those Big C. The other part are the little c, are the not observable parts of a society or culture, such as perceptions, attitudes, beliefs, values. Here's a definition up on the screen. Big C is most visible, such as holidays, art, literature, food, and architecture. Examples of little c: communication styles, body language, cultural norms, myths, and legends. Activity 4, I believe this is activity 5, I have my students create a list of examples of big C and little c. And here is what they created. I love they have the pyramid up on the top. They have the Eiffel Tower and a church. They have an angel from the city of Mexico. They have the mountain from Monterey. On the bottom, they have a piñata, Dia de Muertos, Chavo de Ocho, food. All of these parts of culture that are observable and very visible. Little c is not so visible. This would be body language. Up here on the top, we have a hand, a finger pointing to a watch for sense of time, not as visible, not as observable. We have La Leyenda de la Llorona, more body language. Also space between people, how close people, what is acceptable space between people. In different cultures, that space is larger, and in other cultures, that is much smaller. So that was the last activity. And let's do a test. Which do you think are big C and which are little c? Okay. On one side, we have Dia de Muertos, which we put as big C, and the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which is architecture. Those are easily visible parts of culture. On the left, we put the girl as her body language, or she's praying, which is not such a visible part of culture. And the term for codo, that we don't like to spend money, especially us here in Monterrey. We're very codos, some of us. And we put that as little c. This brings us to the end of our presentation. Let's see how much you remember. Question number 1. What are the goals of culture? Do you remember? We also, number 2, what is culture? Here are some of the components of culture. Hopefully you could remember at least 5 of these. Number 3, name activities to help teach culture. Do you remember any of the activities I just explained and we discussed here? Here are the 5 activities we discussed here. For more activities, I recommend this site, these sites. And on the bottom for your younger students, I completely recommend the true story of the 3 little pigs as told by the big bad wolf. Another way to help students see a story from a different point of view. And remember Rav, respect, appreciate, and value. We have who is considered the father of multiculturalism in the United States of America, James A. Banks. He states that the teacher is a cultural mediator and a change agent. So remember, you have the power to change your students' beliefs and make this world a better place. Questions, comments, doubts? I look forward to speaking with you at the end of this session. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening today, and I'll see you in a little bit in the question and answer session. Bye.